When we face a problem, whether it's planning a trip, fixing a Lego model, or leading an organization, our natural tendency is to sort of race ahead. But some friction, well, that's actually a good thing. I think a good analogy here is the analogy of a race car. The teams that win, they don't go pedal to the metal the whole time. They brake when they go in the corners. They pull in for pit stops. And when the car is on fire, they pull over, stop, and get out so they don't die. So a customer, an employee, a senior leader, when they want to do something and they run into obstacles that make it slower, harder, more frustrating, we call this organizational friction. And a lot of times that's a bad thing, but sometimes that's a good thing. I'm Bob Sutton. I'm an organizational psychologist and best-selling author of 8 books, including The Friction Project, How Smart Leaders Make the Right Things Easier and the Wrong Things Harder. One thing that we emphasize in our research and in the book, The Friction Project, is it the right or wrong thing to do? And it's ridiculously simple, which is that if it's the right thing to do, I don't know, paying a bill, getting reimbursed for a travel expense, then it's the right thing to do. It should be easy and it should happen fast and be frictionless. But if it's the wrong thing to do, I don't know, stealing money from your organization, breaking a law, well, those things, they should be difficult or impossible to do. So a good example of constructive friction is Elizabeth Holmes, then CEO of Theranos. She did some unlawful things trying to sell a blood testing device that didn't work. And she started pressing military officials to put her blood testing device on military helicopters. And in fact, she even had a 4-star general press the sort of lower level lieutenant colonel bureaucrats to put this on helicopters. And they refused because it did not have FDA approval. And there's this rule that it had to have FDA approval, which, well, that's actually a good thing. And an interesting contrasting example to Elizabeth Holmes is a company in San Francisco called Sequel, which has reinvented the modern tampon. They went through all the friction to develop the product over and over again to get FDA approval, and now it's being manufactured and sold. And to me, that's a good example of constructive friction. They took the slow, hard road, and now they have a legitimate product that we know works. In the name of full disclosure, I just invested $25,000 in their company. I may or may not get it back, but I couldn't resist. Anyway. A friction fixer is someone who is obsessed and focused on making the right things easier and the wrong things harder, and they see themselves as trustees of others' time. They're constantly aware of how the big and little decisions they make waste people's time, maybe are a good use of people's time. And a good example of this, I took a visit to the Department of Motor Vehicles office. So I get there at 7:30 in the morning. There's a long line. There's 60 people in front of me. It's like, I know what I'm going to be doing all day. But at 7:45, this wonderful gentleman walks out, asks each of us why we're there. Some people he sends away because you can't get a passport at the California DMV. Others of us, like me, he gave a form to fill out, told us what line to get in, and I expected I would spend 3 hours going through the process. I was out of the office at 8:20 in a state of shock that a visit to the Department of Motor Vehicles was one of the lowest friction experiences I had, and it was in large part because of that gentleman who went down the line, showed respect for our time, and helped us navigate quickly through the process. And yes, just because you aren't at the top of the pecking order doesn't excuse you from being a trustee of others' time. One of the things that we think that good friction fixers do is they're skilled at diagnosing what ought to be hard and what ought to be easy. And there's 2 questions that great friction fixers ask. The first one, do I know what the heck I'm doing? In many situations, It's great to think fast and be on automatic pilot, but when we're in a cognitive minefield, when things are falling apart, maybe you should sort of stop yourself and just do nothing. A good example of this is Google Glass, which was a computer meets your eyeglasses. And Sergey Brin, co-founder, saw the product, fell in love with it, and he kind of ripped it out of the hands of the team, even though they were telling him it wasn't ready for prime time, manufactured thousands of them, gave them to a bunch of famous people, but it had battery life problems, security problems. It didn't work. People couldn't figure out how to operate it. And it was actually on the list of the worst products of all time. So sometimes, even if you're the boss, you need to slow down and think before you make a dumb decision. So that's the first one. The second diagnostic question is whether or not the decision is reversible. Firing the CEO, acquiring a company, selling your company. If you're going to make a decision like that, you got to kind of slow down and not screw it up. But if you're doing something that's reversible, then in that situation, you should sort of throw it out in the world and see what happens. I'll tell you a little story. There's a famous firm called IDEO, and it used to be 50 people, and it was great. They'd have everybody together. It would feel like a community. They grew to 150 people. There was confusion. They had a hard time staffing projects. And so the CEO and founder, David Kelly, called the whole company together. But right before this meeting, he shaved off his Groucho Marx type mustache. And none of us had ever seen him without his mustache, including his wife, who screamed. And he looked at everybody in the room and he said, okay, we're going to do a reorganization. This change is just like my mustache. It's a reversible prototype. We can change the structure just as I can re-grow back my mustache. Now, if he cut off his finger, that would not be a reversible prototype. So you've got to be careful that some prototypes and some changes are one-way doors, that there's no going back.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. To learn even more from the world's biggest thinkers, get Big Think Plus for your business.
When have you experienced a profound sense of disconnection from others, and what did you learn from it? I don't know, since I gained consciousness, I think it feels like I spend more time dissecting the human experience than having one myself. My name is Kaylin Partlow. I am an author, I am an autism advocate, I'm a content creator, and I'm a registered behavior technician. We came prepared. We have 3 fidget toys. How could you possibly screw up if you have 3 fidget toys? You could not. All the anxious thoughts from the brain travel down the arm and into the hand and into the object, and they no longer live in the brain. I think I like Balloon Dog the most. What do you imagine other people assume about you? I think people in person think that my life is easy and it is free from pain or significant issues. And I don't think they realize that I'm intelligent to the degree that I am. Is there a voice in your head that tells you how bad you are, that says you're selfish, you're spoiled, you're stupid? Whose voice is that? And when was the first time you heard that? I think when I was little, my perception of myself was that I was stupid. It meant I was stupid, and even if I didn't have a name for it, I felt stupid because I was failing the 3rd grade. And how do you fail the 3rd grade and have a good self-esteem, you know? You kind of can't do those 2 things at the same time. And so when I got assessed, it was pretty disappointing, I think, on everybody's behalf that we got autism, we got ADHD, we got dyslexia, we got dyscalculia, we got dysgraphia, dyspraxia. You know, getting diagnosed, it kind of put a word to it. So instead of stupid, I was dyslexic, which helped a little, not a lot, but a little, just to have a word for it that wasn't dumb or wrong. If someone doesn't understand you, what are you making it mean about you? In an ideal world, if somebody didn't understand you, they would just say, I don't understand that. But traditionally, that's not how most people communicate. They, I don't know, give me a normal person example. What do the normies do? Yeah, sometimes they just stop communicating. They don't tell you, oh, I didn't understand that. They just are done with you. When I was little, I was really obsessed with dogs, and it wasn't enough to just play with my dog. And so for a very long time, I said that I was a dog. You know, my name is Kaylin, and it starts with a K, and I was 9 years old, and so therefore I was a K9. I think sometimes if I got lucky, you know, little kids at the age of 9 would bark back, and they would play dogs with me, but eventually they would get bored. They'd be like, no, that's weird. We don't want to do that. And that just didn't make sense to me. What action do you want to take but don't feel ready yet? My first thought was I need a new car and I don't want a car payment. But then, like, in consideration for what this activity is, probably the answer we're looking for is that I've not prioritized interpersonal relationships. If I'm in a social situation, I have to think about looking at people's faces, intentionally listening to their words and filtering out my own brain noise. I have to think about my own facial expression and body language and posture to make sure that I don't send the wrong message. And so when you're faced with attempts that don't work or attempts that don't feel worthwhile, then it's really difficult to motivate yourself to continue when you know that you're not likely to encounter success. What are you most afraid will never change about yourself or your life, and why? I guess, what if my interpersonal issues never get better? Feeling big emotions and feeling them very strongly, and by my own metric, being just a little bit neurotic to live with. Being lonely. Like, I'm pretty satisfied with how I am, but like, you're meant to grow and change. And so I guess I'd be afraid that I'd stay like this forever. My relationship with loneliness it's worse nights, weekends, and holidays. The loneliness kind of creeps back in because I'm no longer needed in a professional capacity, and you know, I've got people who more or less need me in a personal capacity, but when those people don't need me or are busy, that's when the loneliness kind of starts to set in, and you start to kind of look around and realize, well, wait a minute, everything has stopped. Where did everybody go? Everybody else is out living their life. Everybody else is out doing things with other people, and I'm sitting here thinking about what things I might do at work next time. Sometimes I write when I feel that way, and I'm a pretty good writer, and when I'm in a bad mood, I'm a really good writer, unfortunately. When I am sad or upset, I go inside my closet and close the door, and it's incredibly dark and it's very quiet, and there's just nothingness in there except for all of my feelings, which kind of fills up the closet and maybe then some. And I kind of channel that, I guess, through my fingers and into the words that I write until there's nothing else left, and sometimes I fall asleep. What personal strength are you most reluctant to acknowledge, and how has it impacted your life? When you get diagnosed with multiple disabilities, you don't get the luxury of ignoring your personal weaknesses, and also you really cling to your personal strengths. And so when you spend a large portion of your childhood unsuccessful in academic environments, you come to the conclusion that I can't do this. And I have evidence to support why I can't do this, because every time I've tried, it's failed, and I could pull out all the paperwork that says that I have. But when I started with Project Hope, they gave me tasks and activities that I could be successful with. I saw areas in my life in which I was successful and without a whole lot of help. And it's really kind of empowered me to take advantage of other opportunities I've been offered as a result of that. When did you truly feel celebrated? Probably when I was on Netflix, and then we had the viewing party when it came out.
Hello.
Hi. My name is Kaylin, I'm 24 years old, and I'm single, and I'm looking for a boyfriend. To have such a large attendance at my viewing party, it was coworkers, it was casual friends, it was acquaintances, it was just a bunch of people who I knew. Everybody showed up, and I thought that that was particularly special. You know the whole thing where they say, do it scared? I realized just how capable I was of doing it scared. So I very quickly, in my own mind, became someone who thrives under pressure.
What do we think about the fingerprint as the new symbol for autism?
And the idea that I could be a public speaker was not a thing that I thought I could achieve. It was maybe a thing that I was interested in doing, but I didn't think it was possible. But with the newfound knowledge of me thriving under pressure, I could pursue things that were difficult. Not only could I tolerate them, but I could pursue them and I could be successful with them. Please bring light, bring hope to those who need it.
I had seen the character you were playing on TV.
We have to be willing to criticize if we're going to defend the universality of human rights. Why do I have to push you to give them credit?
You don't have to push
It's all bad news
But
as far as you're
I'm
concerned.
more interested.
I think you were America's provocative Muslim. And I think like somewhere along the way, I was like, why do you play this angry person on TV? You don't seem like an angry person at all.
In this episode of The Dilemma, you'll meet someone who helped me develop my moral courage. I'm bringing a deeply personal conundrum. It's about my role and responsibility as a content creator. Namely, do I air an interview that I did with an Islamic Jihad leader in Gaza, an interview that exposed how he manipulates Islam's scripture, the Quran? Or do I shelve that interview, since it'll likely only deepen distrust in media narratives?
The question is, what kind of person do you want to be? And I think it's obvious the path that you have chosen, which is that you want to be a social healer.
If you're talking about a Messianic Jew in the West Bank justifying violence, or if you're talking about a white supremacist justifying violence, it's the same issue. It's about making that kind of connection across any of that justification.
I think a lot of people have a tendency to view like a conversation as a debate rather than an actual discourse. And like I feel like when we pivot towards a debate-centered conversation, then we start to lose respect for one another.
And when that happens, there can be no trust.
You know that adrenaline rush that comes from feeding your ego brain? The dilemma is, are you willing to trade it for the slower, more enduring rewards of reviving trust in one another? Welcome to The Dilemma. How do you remember our first encounter?
So I'd read your book, and of course I'd seen all of the kind of explosion around the book, and I had seen the character you were playing on TV. I think you were America's provocative Muslim.
Moderate Muslims, what you've
Not
been
many.
calling for,
Not
stepping
many.
up with signs, visibly
And I
making
feel
themselves
sorry.
targets.
In Libya,
You've got to give
there are
them
some of
credit,
them.
though, Bill.
Absolutely, because
Okay.
because they could be assassinated.
But why do I
for
have
doing
to
that.
push you to give them credit?
By the way, at the time I was playing a character on TV too. I was America's friendly Muslim, but I found the character to be narrow and stultifying. We are all part of the us. And if we confuse this, if we get a sense that it is a religion that is against us, man, this is only gonna get worse. I knew the distinction between a public persona and a private individual. I was aware of that. And I think like somewhere along the way, I was like, why do you play this angry person on TV? You don't seem like an angry person at all.
So I'll tell you why I came off publicly as angry. It's because I felt under siege all the time for having a point of view, for advocating reform in our faith at a time when saying that was seen as a sop to Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And so, honestly, when you said to me, you know, you seem so nice, I remember thinking, because I am.
Yeah.
I am. The reason your innate decency had the dramatic effect on me that it did is that you gave me what I would call an honorable off-ramp from culture warring.
The truth of the matter is your inner car had been burning its engine so hot on the highway of anger, it was looking for an off-ramp, and I just happened to be present when you were like, oh, I think I'll turn off here, right? And I think what's powerful about this is we might be in that situation as a culture. I think that there might be like wide groups of people who are at the end of their anger highway, whose engines have burned too hot for too long, and they're looking for an off-ramp.
You were yourself a culture warrior
Yeah.
for a few years.
I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, So I get to college and I hear language like institutionalized racism and white supremacy, and I swallowed the pill whole and I just raged. And part of the reason I raged was because the people who initiated me into social change were angry people. And there's like something romantic about it. People wear Che Guevara t-shirts, right? There is something romantic about a fist in the air approach, and that's how it was presented to me. But it did not take me very long to realize this is not who I am, and it's burning me up inside. But the problem is, I'd created a character for myself.
It's exactly because I'm a different person today than I was 20 years ago that I will be completely transparent with you. I'm not just embarrassed, I'm ashamed of the interview that I conducted with the political leader of Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And ashamed because of the way I conducted it. Is what?
He's too busy. He's got to go now.
He's too busy. Are you sure that you're not pulling a fast one on me? You're not just not wanting to answer this question? I played gotcha. And Ibu, I got him. But so what? The world is replete with gotcha journalism, which is why I believe that if I were to publish this interview now, I would only be feeding the noise machine.
I don't think you want to do 100 interviews about releasing that footage, which is what you would then be presented to the public as the person who played gotcha with this figure. And that's the character you would have to play. And the problem with playing a character on TV is it seeps into your personhood, as you and I both know, right? I don't think you want to be that character. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And I think it's obvious the path that you have chosen, which is that you want to be a social healer. And I think that that's all about trust. People trust people who have competence and caring to build a more beautiful social order.
I'll tell you why I've chosen the path of being a social healer. It's because it has healed me. I don't think it's something noble. I don't think it's, something that we need to leave to the Mandelas and Rosa Parks and Gandhis of this world. Fact of the matter is that when I lift the pressure off of my shoulders to be right all the time in every situation, I can lead my life with curiosity, which teaches me so much more than I would otherwise learn. And learning is a joy.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Yes. I honestly think that one of the greatest, not just skills, but qualities anybody can have is, can you create a space where people can have an honest and searching conversation? That's a question that we should all ask ourselves. And that's a question that has answers.
I feel very resolved about this specific dilemma. Do I do anything with the footage of the interview with the Islamic Jihad leader? And for reasons you now know, I'm at peace with not releasing it. Doesn't mean I'm right. You might even advise me otherwise, and I'm genuinely curious if you do advise me otherwise.
I would never show that in isolation, because it's not about that one interview. It's about any justification of violence. So if you're talking about a Messianic Jew in the West Bank justifying violence, or if you're talking about a white supremacist justifying violence, it's the same issue. It's about making that kind of connection across any of that justification. And I think if you do that, it's automatically less inflammatory because it's not about that one interview anymore.
Problem is that we live in a world in which there's something called context collapse. And it means that those with agendas, and boy, are they ever everywhere, will take snippets or will ignore the context that you've given, even as you set it up. And not only will they ignore it, but then they'll inflame it with their own commentary. So if I want to be, going back to the point, who do you want to be? If I want to be worthy of trust, I don't see how I'm furthering that vision by releasing this interview.
So I was thinking that if you had the opportunity to talk, obviously you won't be able to talk with this gentleman, but if you had someone who had his similar views in a sort of one-on, like a debate, is that something you would be willing to engage in?
I actually did engage in a much healthier debate with a journalist from Al Jazeera. And I prepared myself emotionally. I said to myself, Irshad, remember, he is not your enemy. He is only your adversary.
If you buy this argument that the mullahs are all bad, everyone thinks for themselves.
All bad. Come on.
A lot of them are bad.
Hyping that.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't be a typical journalist.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't do that.
A lot of them are bad.
When he asks a question, take a moment. Take actually a breath. Let that panicky part of your threat-seeking brain slow down enough to now move over into the, more evolved part of the brain where feeling and thinking can coexist. And that can happen just by taking a deep breath. If your challenger makes a good point, say so. There is no shame in acknowledging that everyone has a slice of, valid experience to share.
I feel like, especially when talking about contentious political issues and especially issues that impact people on a personal level, I think a lot of people have a tendency to view a conversation as a debate rather than an actual discourse. And I feel like when we pivot towards a debate-centered conversation, then we start to lose respect for one another and the inability to actually listen to each other and listen to what that person's experiences are or their background or what areas of value they can bring to the conversation.
And when that happens, there can be no trust. Exactly. Going back to what you were talking about, Irshad. Yeah.
Well, Hannah, I love how you put that a discussion doesn't have to be a debate. And a lot of people do conflate those two things. The problem with debate, and by the way, I love a good debate. Don't get me wrong. Debate is wonderful for a tournament, lousy as a way to live your life. Because in a debate, there can only ever be one winner, right? And that ego brain, that primal brain that we're all born with, is saying, I'm not going to let you lose. Thing is, my ego brain is saying the same thing to me. I'm not going to let you lose.
So then we're both just yelling at each other, not even listening to what the other one's saying.
Exactly. And worse, we're trying to one-up each other for the sake of winning something that never needed to be win-lose in the first place. Right? Have you ever self-censored, stopped yourself from speaking because you didn't trust that the person or people on the other end would be willing to hear you?
All the time. I'm very picky about who I like to be friends with because I want people who are on my same political spectrum. So when they aren't, then I have a hard time kind of wanting to do dialogue with them because I know I'll blow up at them and I know they'll blow up at me. So a lot of the times when I'm talking with my friends at work and they say something against LGBT issues, then I have to kind of just stop.
I'm going to say something that might seem presumptuous.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You can tell me if it is. I'm sensing that maybe you're treating that encounter as win-lose. Namely, since I can't win, I'm just going to stop right here. Is that, in your heart of hearts, how you feel about those sorts of encounters?
Yeah, I would have to say so. Yeah. Because I would really want everyone to be on my side. And if you're not on my side, then it's just kind of an oh well situation type thing for me.
Instead of just ending the conversation, what would be valuable to do as far as you're concerned?
I would say definitely questioning it a lot more and trying to have more of a peaceful, not debate, but just, a one-on-one where it's hey, can you at least tell me, why you're feeling that way? And I can tell you how this makes me feel and why it makes me feel that way. And then hopefully we can continue going on from there.
When you tame your ego brain, you're actually not giving anything up accept the emotional drama that comes from, engaging in either or. In other words, you can stand your ground and create common ground at the same time. It's not one or the other. Standing your ground is about what you believe. Creating common ground is about how you express what you believe. So if you can leave your other feeling respected, not agreed with, but heard, you've just motivated them far more than they would have been otherwise to give you a fair hearing in turn.
Yeah, and I mean, what I really love is the Socratic method. When you're talking about asking questions, you are forced to listen. You are forced to kind of to think about, how can I get more out of that person? I need to listen, and then I need to reformulate it. And so, as a method of getting that empathy, asking questions is the best skill to have.
As long as they're sincere questions. Sure. And I know that should go without saying. We're all very, very good as human beings at asking really judgy questions.
Sure.
Do you have any idea what that means? Have you got any clue the impact of what you just said? No, that is a question, all right, but it's really an accusation with a question mark at the end of it. Yeah. So it really is about easing us as yes, I'll be this ambitious, easing us as a species out of the either or mindset and into something richer, more complex, and for that reason will require us to slow down a little bit. And that is the both and paradigm.
I'm often asked, are great strategic thinkers born or are they made? And my answer is always yes. It's like so many important and valuable human capabilities, a mixture of nature and nurture and experience. You're not going to become a world-class marathoner if you don't have the right physiology, the right muscles, the right lungs, but you still need to train very hard. And it's very similar with strategic thinking. You certainly are born with an endowment. Some people are naturally better at it than others, but there's so much you can do to develop yourself. And I always tell people, don't worry about the endowment. Focus on the improvement, because my research shows definitively that you can get much better at being an effective strategic thinker. I'm Michael Watkins. I'm a professor of leadership and organizational change at the IMD Business School in Lausanne, Switzerland. My book is The 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking. Strategic thinking has always been a critical skill at the top. Leaders must be able to recognize emerging challenges and opportunities, establish the right priorities to focus their organizations, and critically mobilize their people to do what's necessary to adapt to the many changes that are going on today. In the research I did on strategic thinking, I identified 6 key mental disciplines that underlie your ability to recognize, prioritize, and mobilize. Pattern recognition is a foundational discipline of strategic thinking. The ability to find the signal, the important information in what can be a sea of noise. Not just absorbing what's happening, but thinking about why, thinking about connection. When grandmasters look at a chessboard, they don't just see pieces, they don't just see the layout of the board, they see the most important patterns that exist in that configuration. They see opportunity, they see concentrations of power, they see potential vulnerabilities. At the heart of your ability as a leader to navigate complexity is the discipline of systems analysis. It's absolutely essential, of course, that systems models capture the most important features and dynamics of the system that you're talking about. But given the very, very high levels of complexity today, no human being, and indeed, so far, no computer, is able to flawlessly model the entire set of variables and interactions that constitute a complicated system. One example I use is climate, where today we have very good models of climate, but they're absolutely simplifications of reality. They model large chunks of the atmosphere, for example, in ways that are really kind of crude almost. But they do capture the most important features of the overall climate system in a way that lets you make good predictions. As you focus on the discipline of mental agility, it's important to understand this idea of level shifting. There's a CEO I work with who describes this as cloud to ground thinking. The ability to move from a high-level perspective to be in the clouds, to see the big picture of what's going on, but also to drill down into the detail when necessary. The great strategic thinkers I know are able to move between those levels of analysis and do so fluidly and also intentionally. Structured problem solving is what you do with teams to help them engage in rigorous processes of framing and solving the most consequential problems that the organization faces. The structured part is really essential because it ensures that you're doing a good job of truly solving the right problem. That's the framing part. And then generating and testing the right options so that you end up with a robust solution. There can be many stakeholders involved that have an interest in what happens. And so it's essential, therefore, to establish a process that moves people through that, framing and solving of problems such that at the end of the process, they're in alignment, if not enthusiastic, about what happens going forward. At its core, visioning is about identifying the future to which you are trying to move your organization, a compelling portrait of where we are going to go together and why we should feel excited about getting there. There's a core tension you need to manage between ambition and achievability. Err too far on the side of ambition, you're creating something that's unrealistic, people won't feel like they can really accomplish, and ultimately does exactly what you're trying not to do, which is to demotivate people. Err too far on the side of achievability, it's too easy, it's not ambitious enough, it's not exciting for people, it doesn't really fundamentally motivate them. And finally, politics is an essential part of every human organization, and there's simply no avoiding it. There are certain tactics that you can use that will help you influence people. A classic example of this is what's known as sequencing strategy. This is really about being thoughtful about the order in which you communicate with people and how you engage in order to build momentum in the directions you want the organization to go. I'm going to talk first to Christian, and then I'm going to talk to Stephanie. And if I have Christian and Stephanie on board, then getting Robert on board is going to be easier. And I need to be careful in the process not to overplay things in a way that causes Trudy to feel threatened by what I'm trying to do and start to do things to mobilize potential opposition. Just think about this process of moving people step by step to a place that they wouldn't have gone in a single leap. The people making the decisions about leaders' futures are more and more weighting the importance of strategic thinking capability in their decisions about whether you will advance or not. And this just amplifies the importance of focusing as much as possible on building your strategic thinking capability. It really is the fast track to the top.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. To learn even more from the world's biggest thinkers, get Big Think Plus for your business.